In this video, we're going to talk about two things, two pretty big trends in the gun world. The first is the 5.7 round from FN, and then the second is PDWs. Are these two separate things that are happening? Are these two different weapon platforms to solve two different problems, or do we, here in this very video, need to invent an entirely new, never before seen firearm? So let's ask the first question right now, a question that everyone will love and nobody will be offended by. Is 5.7 the new 9mm? Now, before you answer and get super offended down in the comments section, you should remember your history. 9mm is now about 100 years old, and when it was about 40 years old, that's when 9mm parabellum became the standard, and it began to replace 45 because it was lighter and faster. It had less recoil and a higher mag capacity. And today, 5.7 is about 40 years old, and it's becoming more standard. Will it replace 9mm because it is lighter and faster, has less recoil, and allows for higher magazine capacity? Now, I expect this idea to get some massive pushback in the comment section, maybe even some emotionally negative responses, because after all, a long time ago, there was a lot of pushback against 9mm, and even the intermediate rifle cartridges in the 60s and the 70s. These cartridges had no stopping power, and well, I will say gun culture today no longer has the same attitude about 9mm or 5.56, but somehow we have still maintained, I would say, similar attitudes about other things, and we've kept a lot of FUD lore. Today, we laugh at the phrase stopping power, but we still have some of the same hangups. If you will permit me a very short rabbit trail, I believe that gun culture is bad at honoring fathers, but good at continuing their mistakes, which is literally the worst of both worlds. We want to try to have the best of both worlds, actually. So we need to recognize guys that came before us, like Jeff Cooper. We need to recognize that he was great at some stuff, and because time has passed, maybe he's not the ultimate word on other stuff. So Jeff Cooper, just for example, hated 9mm because it was too weak and anemic, just like 5.56 with its pitiful, tiny bullets. And it's easy to think about Cooper as an old-fashioned FUD kind of guy, because he loved 45 ACP and big-bore bolt-action rifles and lever guns, and he was always talking about mindset and carry conditions, and he was an IPSC shooter. But you have to remember that he was a very advanced pioneer in his day. He helped invent IPSC, and he named it the Practical Shooting Confederation on purpose. He's the guy who named the carry conditions. He was one of the very first people to write about combat mindset, and he didn't just complain about 9mm. He actually went out and invented 10mm auto. So I think a little respect is in order. Also, to be fair to the critics in the 70s, the 9mm that was manufactured back then was less consistent and less predictable than today's 9mm, also less powerful. We have much better ammo now. We got plus P rounds, we got plus P plus rounds, and so by the 1990s, gun culture finally accepted 9mm as a lethal round, even though it had no stopping power. And then eventually everyone accepted 5.56 as a lethal round, even though it is a really tiny bullet. But today everyone understands this. Everyone knows that 5.56 is way deadlier than 9mm. They've been in common use for a long time, and there have been a lot of police reports that we have all read where lots of 9mm rounds were used with basically no effect, and then a few shots of 5.56 come into play, which are suddenly extremely effective. And that is because speed matters. It is a very important part of kinetic energy. I'm not going to put the math up on the screen, but the way that it works is the mass of a projectile increases the energy of that projectile in a linear way, but velocity increases the energy exponentially. So Let's talk about 45 for a minute. In the words of the fans of 45 ACP, it really packs a wallop. Unfortunately, it's the one type of ammo that I couldn't find in the T-Rex ammo bay. I thought for sure we would have some, but I don't have anything here to show you guys. But the average federal round, which is a 230 grain bullet coming out of a 5-inch barrel, has about 850 to 950 feet per second of velocity, which means 350 to 450 foot-pounds of energy. And if you want to compare that to 9mm out of the same 5-inch barrel, technically it would have to be a different 5-inch barrel when this actually meant to shoot 9mm, but you would get this bullet here, which is a 115 grain bullet. That'll get you about 1,100 to 1,200 feet per second, which turns into 300 to 350 foot-pounds of energy. Very, very close in terms of power for half of the weight. To further explain the importance of velocity on this equation, let's look at 5.56 for a second. The bullet is tiny, it's 55 grains, but it comes out of the AR-15 going 3,000 feet per second, which means that it hits with 1,200 foot-pounds of energy. So it's got half of the weight of the 9mm bullet, but because it's going 3 times faster, it's got 4 times the energy. So speed is really key for developing that energy. And neutralizing a threat is all about energy transfer. More energy is good for you and worse for the target. That's the basic math. But there's a little bit more to it than just that energy transfer equation. Living organisms are kind of complicated. You got that energy transfer, then there's the infrastructure collapse that happens if structural integrity is compromised by a projectile. Then there's the blood removal component. People are kind of like juice cans. The fluid comes out a little faster if you make multiple holes. But then there's the hydrostatic shock or hydrodynamic shock stuff, or cavitation. Ballistic gel is great for showing some of this, but it doesn't tell the whole story. We'll talk more about the ballistic gel later. So more speed means more energy, but above a certain threshold of speed, it also means there's extra damage occurring inside the organism because of these extra fluid effects, hydrodynamic effects inside the giblets. So that obviously brings us back to 5.7. The projectile is really similar to 5.56 in a lot of ways. It's got less speed than 5.56, but it's got way faster speeds than 9mm. So how does it actually do? Well, out of a 4.7-inch barrel, which is what the FN57 comes with, a 32 grain bullet is going to hit speeds of over 2,000 feet per second, maybe as high as 2,100. And that's going to develop 315 foot-pounds of energy, which is really similar. It's within spitting distance of the 9mm. But because it is moving at that much higher velocity, it probably is reaching the speeds at the muzzle for some of those really disturbing, liquefying hydrodynamic effects. Now, a lot of this is sort of guesswork. 5.7 currently in the real world is rare enough that we've seen only a few real-world action taking place with it. So a good example to bring up might be the 2009 Fort Hood shooting. You can look into the details yourself. I'm not going to go over them here, but there does seem to be a really high lethality for center mass shots. And then because this is used in Europe, you can get kind of anecdotal data about what it kind of does. But even outside of the damage caused by the round, the energy transfer, etc., there are some other advantages presented by this little round here. It is a littler round. Its smaller diameter means that it gives you much greater mag capacity, and it gives you much lower recoil, which means you should be able to get better round placement. And While it started out as an incredibly rare, hard to find, and expensive round, it is now getting major traction. FN has made a pistol and a PDW for it, obviously, but Ruger makes a pistol and a PDW and a rifle, and PSA makes a pistol and a PDW is coming. Kel-Tec makes a PDW and a pistol is coming, and then Smith & Wesson makes a pistol. It might be the best 5.7 pistol that is on the market at the moment, and then CMMG and Diamondback, a whole bunch of people make little 5.7 AR PDWs, and everybody is making ammo for it now. So the price has come way down, the availability has come up. So, is it the new 9mm? For the record, this is not deliberate comment section engagement. We're honestly asking the question, but we know there's going to be a lot of comments. So yeah, 5.7 is almost exactly the same muzzle energy out of a pistol barrel as the 9mm. I estimate it has about 25% less recoil. You get about 25% more bullets in the same size of magazine. And let's be optimistic or pessimistic and say that you get 25% more shock tissue damage and a flatter trajectory. I've got to say, this thing is actually growing on me as a pistol round, even though it was originally designed as a personal defense weapon round. So it shoots very soft, and it's extremely pointable. So yeah, I gotta say, for controllable shooting, even out to some reasonable distances, this thing is easier than 9, and just feels nicer than 9. And like I said, M&P is probably the nicest 5.7 that you can get for a reasonable price right now. It's good stuff. So now we have to ask question number 2. Is, right now, the golden age of the PDW? The answer is yes. Obviously yes. Everyone is super excited about PDWs. They're a very hot trend in the gun industry right now. And so, as 5.7 is rising in popularity as well, isn't this just the perfect round for PDWs? Well, I say the answer is no. Possibly, obviously no. Now this might surprise you because you remember your history. In 1985, NATO wanted to replace this ancient, old, lame 9mm round, and so FN started working on the P90 in 1986. And all the development was going around the 5.7 round, that very cool magazine, and the P90 PDW concept simultaneously. The 5.7 pistol development happened years later, and then meanwhile, while they were doing this, H&K was developing the 4.6 round to go into the MP7. And speaking of FUD lore, there are a lot of myths around the original purpose of 5.7 and the sketchy trials process and armor penetration, and we don't have time to go into all of those, but 9-Hole Reviews, as usual, has some fantastic historical explanations and explorations of stuff that was going on at that time. But in short, the Belgians were winning the trials, and the Germans complained, as Germans often do, and so the 5.7 was not officially adopted. But the P90 just looked so stinking cool that it was instantly inserted into every video game and every sci-fi movie of the 1990s. And I personally love the P90, kind of irrationally and emotionally. It's not just the games and the movies, although I have fond memories of those. Soldier of Fortune wrote an article about the P90 development program in the 90s, which totally changed my understanding of engineering and weapons development and testing when I was little. It was probably a very formative thing for me. And the P90 is just so bold and it's so interesting. It's such a great outside-the-box concept and project. But now, many years later, to be perfectly honest, I don't actually want one very badly. And it's partly because it's chambered in 5.7. As interesting as 5.7 is, in my opinion, as a handgun round, I'm kinda less interested in it for PDWs. And I'm also a little less interested in the form factor of the P90. Now remember, in the 1980s, your classic PDW would have looked like this. The MP5 is very iconic SMG, but today we can squeeze a lot more firepower into a much smaller package with this SIG MCX here as just one example. Now, part of the reason that we can do this is using ammo that is optimized for these shorter barrels right here. If you remember our 5.56 example, we kind of cheated. We were talking about 5-inch pistol barrels, but the 3,000 feet per second that this 55 grain bullet gets, that only comes when you shoot it out of a 16-inch barrel. If you were to shoot it out of a 5-inch barrel, it would be slower than 2,000 feet per second, which means that is 1/3 of its speed gone, and that's 2/3 of its energy gone. That means the bullet is actually traveling slower than the 5.57 pistol round, possibly too slow to do any of that fun hydrodynamic shock stuff. So 5.56 is no good in a small package, and 5.7 is. The PS90 is probably the best example of this with its 16-inch barrel. The P90 has a 10.5-inch barrel, 10.4 I think, and then the 5.7 pistol has a 4.7. And so you can see a wide range of barrel lengths, and ballistically speaking, there's not that much loss in velocity, even at the shortest length. This thing has been optimized to get up to a really high rate of speed in a really short barrel. And 300 blackout, which you can chamber a lot of your smaller things for, is kind of the same. There's a wide variety of ammos available, but this 115 grain bullet, which is basically the same weight as 9mm, will get up to over 2,000 feet per second in an 8-inch barrel, which is just over 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. That's almost on par with the 5.56 round, but coming out of half of the barrel length. So if I can get carbine performance squashed down into this SMG style platform, then I don't really need or want this SMG style anymore. I actually want something that's a little bit more like, hate to say it, the MP7. I kind of would prefer that form factor than the P90. Something really, really compact. Something that would make a good home defense weapon. Now, I would say for concealed carry out in public, I want a lot of controllability. I don't want over-penetration. That is where something like this 5.7 round out of this relatively large pistol right here makes a lot of sense. But for home defense, I kind of want a little more power. I want a little more energy. Because I know where my neighbors are and I know the environment better, I might actually want a little bit more penetration. So, what ammo would I like to shoot through a smaller PDW package? Well, ironically, my favorite for this particular application is a round that was designed not for PDWs, but very specifically for a pistol. The field pistol from FK Burno is kind of a monster. It's not a particularly large handgun, but it delivers massive energy thanks to this proprietary 7.5 cartridge right here. This is a much heavier bullet than we're getting out of our 5.7 pistols. It is 95 grains, and it's going basically the same speed, over 2,000 feet per second, which generates 850 foot-pounds of energy. That is much closer to 300 blackout power than 5.7 power. That is a lot of energy coming out of a 6-inch barrel, and that's huge. I really want to shoot this particular round. The problem is the gun that shoots it, the field pistol, is about $7,000. So here's some footage of other better YouTube channels testing it. Now remember earlier we were talking about ballistics gel, which is great for tests. It's clear so you can see the projectile as it does its thing. It's got a great refraction index for seeing shock waves inside. It has a consistent density. This is really good for tracking and doing math and stuff, but like we said before, living tissue isn't any of these things. All my ballistic gel, for example, is inside of my ribs, not a consistent density at all. I want to point out that Military Arms Channel came up with a great test for this because He points out that you can just buy ribs at the store. Or you could shoot an animal. There are a lot of really interesting clips of people hunting big stag or elk with this round, which is a great test. So the FK field pistol has massive power, but for $7,000 is kind of a hard sell as a hunting handgun, and I don't really feel the need for a sidearm with that level of penetrating power, but I do love the round. This 5.7 round appears to be just beautifully optimized at giving you tremendous power out of a very short pistol barrel. And the projectile itself really kind of hits that sweet spot between the weight that's going to carry it a little ways and the speed that's going to give you that energy transfer. And it's short enough that it will fit in a pistol mag. It's even shorter than the 5.7. By putting this much power into a pistol magazine, I can run it in a much smaller package than this 300 Blackout over here. And you can't quite tell, but the barrel length between the Rattler and this gun are almost identical in this much smaller package. And I can also use the same basic manual of arms as with my other sidearm. Now, one advantage that you might point out is that 5.7, even though it is weaker, has such lower recoil that when you put it in a fully automatic package like the P90, you can dump a ton of energy. And that is very, very true. However, with both hands and the brace right here, I think that the more powerful 7.5 cartridge would have very manageable recoil and technically be a more versatile round for different scenarios. In fact, let's go right now to the computer and design the ultimate perfect PDW around this 7.5 cartridge. All right, so here is our TP9 in all of its glory, and then over here is our 3D model of the TP9 as a starting point. I apologize for the crudity of this model. I did not have time to texture it or to paint it, but you get the idea. That's basically what we're working with. So the first thing that we probably want to do is address this mag here and make it take Glock mags. Actually, no, just kidding. I want to keep the TP9 mag if at all possible. So obviously there are some advantages to a Glock magazine when it comes to interoperability and availability and stuff like that. But when you are going to be running a small PDW up close, you kind of want a straighter grip, so a straighter magazine. And if you're going to be running a PDW SMG kind of thing, a double feed magazine is handy. So I really want to stick with the straight mag, even though the internet's tendency is to want Glock everything. However, the 7.5 round that we want to support is a hair longer, just over 1/8 of an inch longer than standard 9mm. So we do need to make a new magazine, but all we have to do is make it a little bit longer. We might even be able to build in rails so it uses the same followers and springs and stuff like that. And then all we really have to do is grab the back of the grip here and make it 1/8 of an inch wider. We're done. Nothing to it. I mean, if you were to ask for more changes, I did have some things in mind. For example, there is a gun called the Star Z49, which is a Spanish knockoff of the German MP40, and it has a very interesting mechanism by which the barrel locks at the front, which means you can quick change barrels. Now, generally you don't need to do this with an SMG. This makes more sense for like large belt-fed machine guns with super high round counts when you want to hot swap the barrels. But I thought that would be an interesting thing to add to this SMG. However, that's something that the TP9, actually, I prefer its method of doing this. Once you take the top of the frame off and you remove this bolt carrier group right here, you can see this is the barrel and it interfaces very interestingly over here. So we're already basically getting the benefits of a front locking rotating barrel. They have a really good system for this. All we really need to do is make sure our magazines can carry the round, make sure that we can drop in a new barrel, which is very simple to do, and then maybe a couple extra springs in the back because of the increased recoil. Now, the reason that we would want to swap this barrel out is because we'd like to be able to run some other ammo. I do think that as awesome as this 7.5 round is, it does have a couple of disadvantages. It is wider, so you can fit fewer of them in the mag, and it is kind of expensive. It's rare, not a lot of people are making it. Fortunately, it is being manufactured in the United States. That's a start. The bullets are basically 30-30 rounds, so you can find the projectiles relatively easy. The case is the hard part. This is a proprietary case. It's not built on anything else. It's not a necked down version of something that is relatively freely available, so this is going to be expensive. If you want to train with this gun, it would be great if you could just drop a 9mm barrel in there and use the regular 9mm mags. So that's actually really easy to do with this thing. So there you kind of have it. It's like, it doesn't feel like we did a lot of work. If you wanted another change, just so it feels like we did something, I would like to add an extra inch to the barrel to get maximum performance out of the 7.5. And I guess while we're at it, we could add a mag holder that is in line here. Want to be able to carry a second mag up here. That's a nice grip there. I would like to be able to attach a rail on both sides. We could add some little flash hiding fins inside of this tri-lug bit right here. I think we're going to have maybe a little bit more of a fireball with 7.5, so a couple of slots, couple of fins might work as a flash hider and still be compatible with B&T's other suppressors and their attachment mechanism. So a lot of stuff that we could make super minor tweaks to, but boy, there's just not a lot that I would change to make this better. Now, we're potentially running into an issue at this point, because if we build this gun around this much hotter round, it's very possible that 9mm just doesn't have the oomph to cycle it. So our drop-in barrel for our cheap economic stuff is possibly 10mm. It's a good thing that we have 10mm auto, that somebody thought ahead to invent that for us. Yeah, there you go. The perfect PDW. We invented it all by ourselves. Okay, so I admit it, no real inventing took place. Not only did we just take a hot round off the shelf and stick it in a hot PDW that was already perfectly designed and call it an invention, we're not the first person to do this. Kind of everyone has done this and tinkered with this concept. In addition to 10mm auto, Jeff Cooper also designed a round that is a lot like the 7.5. It was a 9mm Magnum cartridge, aka the Super Cooper, and he got 2,000 feet per second with 90 grain bullets too. Even Aimpoint, Aimpoint, the optics company, developed a PDW chambered in 221 Fireball, which has a 5.7 projectile with a much larger and spicier cartridge, running at basically rifle pressures. And guess who helped test and name that particular weapon? Yes, it was Jeff Cooper. He called it the PC-80, but it was designed by a guy named Carl Birdie Johansson. And he has a more recent PDW, which is made by Saab, of all people. Saab, inventor of air superiority fighters and inferior luxury sedans. But they have a PDW, which is really fascinating, and it's chambered in 6.5 by 25, which can also get 2,000 feet per second out of a pistol barrel. And if you want to mess with this very cool 6.5 ammo, B&T already makes a TP9 that is chambered in it today. So I guess there's nothing new under the sun. Dozens of companies have experimented with these concepts for many decades, and there's lots of strange wildcat rounds lying around just waiting for people to pick them up and put them into their strange machine pistol prototypes. The main thing that is different today is that, thanks to guys like Jeff Cooper, there's a lot more knowledge about ballistics and firearm technology, and a lot more interest. 5.7 did not make the grade to replace the 9mm in NATO, but the American free market has made it successful anyways. There is now an educated customer base that is really intrigued by this round, both recreationally and practically. A lot of people have really good understanding now of what makes for good defensive handguns. Controllable, low recoil, high energy, high round count, and a lot of people are interested in using 5.7 for that purpose. myself included. And high sales of pistol braces and 300 Blackout also show that people are really interested in something more like a home defense PDW. Higher power, more effective, longer range, but still very short and maneuverable. And I think that 7.5 is a really interesting option for that. But it is kind of interesting how far we've come and how completely we've swapped the roles here. When I was a kid, I thought the P90 was awesome and the FN57 was dumb. And I was pretty sure that I would never own either of them. But now I've kind of swapped sides. I'm very intrigued by a 5.7 sidearm and a very different PDW, and I think there's actually a really good chance that I'm gonna get them both. I always knew I was a little bit dyslexic. I've never felt as dyslexic as talking about 7.5 and 5.7. Wait, hang on.